Good Wednesday morning to you. I'm Jim Sciutto. Poppy is off this morning. Primary results in 5 key states as voters hit the polls Tuesday with fewer than 100 days until the midterms. There were big victories for candidates who still deny the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election. And in what could be a major precursor to November's, voters in one very red state surged to protect abortion rights there. In Michigan, Republican Congressman Peter Meijer, one of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach former President Trump, lost to former Trump administration official John Gibbs. Gibbs has been known to peddle 2020 election lies touted by Trump as well. In Arizona, House Speaker Rusty Bowers, who delivered emotional testimony to the January 6th committee, he is projected to lose his bid for a Senate seat. The winner of that race claimed, quote, the devil himself meddled in the 2020 election, the devil. And in one of the largest rebukes to the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade, voters in Kansas, very red state, have rejected an amendment that could have led to an abortion ban in that state. CNN's Nick Valencia is in Topeka, Kansas, following the story this morning. Nick, the voter turnout here really highlighted the importance of this issue. This seems to have driven voters to the polls, and they voted no.
That's right. Good morning, Jim. Voter turnout turned out to be a huge factor here in Kansas, a state where there is nearly twice as many registered Republicans as Democrats, but a huge swath of unaffiliated voters. And that's what Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, the main coalition of abortion rights advocates here in the state trying to protect abortion access, that's what they were counting on. And they worked tirelessly in recent months and recent weeks to try to educate voters and to get out the vote. They believe they were fighting an uphill battle, Jim, not only because of the ambiguous wording of this amendment where a yes would have stripped abortion rights and a no would have kept the status quo, but I mentioned also this is a deeply conservative state and it was on a Republican primary ballot. So they had to educate voters that were non-Republican that they could actually vote in this primary. And they really did a lot to go door to door to get out the vote. We talked to voters as they exited the polls yesterday, and clearly this was a deeply personal issue for those that headed to the polls.
I just think healthcare is a fundamental right, not just for me, but for any person in this country.
Anybody who actually believes in the Bible knows that, this is something that goes against everything.
The vote here does not only impact Kansans, but it also impacts the region here. It was recently that I spoke to an abortion clinic director. They have 4 clinics here. That abortion clinic director told me that there was nearly 60% of their patients that they've seen recently are from out of state. Places like Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, where abortion rights have been stripped. So this message was one not only for Kansans, but also for the region and really as the country as a whole. The referendum that would have weakened abortion rights here in the state failed, handing a huge victory to abortion rights advocates. Jim?
No question. Could be a possible indicator for the fall. Nick Valencia, thanks so much. Well, Kansas's neighbor, Missouri, also held consequential votes overnight. CNN's chief national affairs correspondent, Jeff Zeleny, he is in St. Louis this morning. So, Jeff, big picture there, and in all 5 states that had primaries yesterday, Republicans sent a pretty resounding message embracing election deniers. I wonder, how significant are these losses for Republicans who stood up for the facts in 2020 and denied those election lies?
Well, Jim, good morning. There is no question the results from last evening's primaries in several states said one big thing. The election of 2020 is still going to be essentially on the ballot this November in the election of 2022. Several of the candidates who won last evening, let's start in Arizona, particularly have not only embraced but really ran on the idea of the election lie from 2020. Of course, all backed by former President Donald Trump. We are now projecting a new projection this morning that the Republican nominee for the Arizona Secretary of State, the top election official in the state, is Mark Finchem. He is an Arizona state legislator who is a lead proponent of election denialism. We are also projecting this morning that Blake Masters will be the Republican Senate nominee in Arizona. He will go head-to-head with Senator Mark Kelly in one of the closest Senate races in the country, we believe, that certainly could help determine control of the U.S. Senate come November. So certainly those are 2 big findings from Arizona. But if you look at Michigan last evening, the Republican nominee the winner of that contest is Tudor Dixon. She has been much softer in her denialism, if you will. She said, yes, there are questions about the 2020 election, but she's going to go head-to-head with Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat, in a very important race in November as well. But Congressman Peter Meijer, of course, one of 10 House Republicans to vote for the impeachment of President Trump, he was defeated by a big election denier, John Gibbs. So certainly that was a running theme throughout the primaries last evening, as Jim, now we are just less than 3 months before the midterm elections.
Yeah, and softer in election denialism is still not stating outright Biden's the legitimate president. You're aware of the battle of the two Erics, as it came to be known, between Eric Greitens and Attorney General Eric Schmitt for Senate primary nomination for the Republican Party. Tell us where that came out.
Indeed, it turned out to be not much of a battle at all between the two Erics, at least. But Eric Schmitt is the Missouri Attorney General, and he was running for the Republican Senate nomination here. Of course, this is to replace retiring Republican Senator Roy Blunt. Republicans have been nervous about this seat because they fear that Eric Greitens, he is the disgraced former governor of Missouri, resigned 4 years ago amidst a sex scandal. He was trying to fight for a comeback here and had the tacit support of the former president. That led to the endorsement on the eve of the election for the two Erics, Eric Greitens and Eric Schmitt. Well, Eric Schmitt, the Attorney General, easily won this race here, also defeating six-term Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler. So Eric Schmitt will be the Republican Senate nominee. He will be running against Trudy Busch Valentine, an heiress to the Anheuser-Busch fortune here. But Republicans breathing much easier that Eric Greitens, the disgraced former governor, will not be on the ballot. So Missouri, a deep red state. Both sides expect that to be the case in November, but of course we'll see. But Jim, now we are less than 3 months before the fall elections.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell was worried about him being the potential nominee as well. Jeff Zeleny,
Sure
thanks
was.
so much. All right, in the latest sign, Justice Department investigators are looking directly at conduct related to the former President Trump. CNN has learned that a federal grand jury has now subpoenaed former Trump White House counsel Pat Cipollone. That grand jury investigating efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Here is January 6th committee member Adam Kinzinger on CNN this morning on what that Cipollone subpoena means for Trump.
I'll say this is probably bad for former President Trump. I mean, this is, if he goes in front of the grand jury, it shows that this is more than, you know, what did John Eastman do, the attorney that basically came up with that crazy scheme to overturn the election. And it probably is a very deep interest in what the president did.
CNN senior crime and justice reporter Caitlin Polantz has been following. So to be clear, you have the January 6th committee investigation. This is the DOJ investigation. He's already testified for the January 6th committee. This will be to a grand jury as part of a criminal investigation by the Justice Department. What do we know?
That's exactly right, Jim.
Yeah.
This is a very significant step in this Justice Department investigation that operates in secrecy, essentially, with the grand jury. But we do know Pamela Brown was able to confirm that Pat Cipollone did receive a federal grand jury subpoena. And this is part of this aggressive drumbeat that the Justice Department has had in recent weeks, trying to lock down not just what was going on January 6th on Capitol Hill. They've prosecuted all these rioters, but also trying to talk to people that testified to the House about what happened in the White House and potentially what Donald Trump was even saying. So what we know so far with others that have gone before the grand jury from the Office of the Vice President is that they haven't been able to say what Trump had said to them because of executive privilege concerns. There's this gearing up for a court fight that the Justice Department is doing. And we do know with this Cipollone reporting is that he and his attorneys have been in discussions about executive privilege. We know he wasn't able to share much about Trump himself, what he witnessed Trump saying, what Trump said to him, to the House Select Committee. So we're going to have to watch and see if that is something that comes up in this grand jury proceeding where Cipollone just can't touch that yet, but it may be something the Justice Department goes after.
No question. CNN is also learning more about more missing texts. And by the way, there's a pattern here. Missing texts from DHS, from the Secret Service around January 6th, and now from senior Pentagon officials. What's CNN's reporting?
That's right. So there's a pattern that is raising a lot of questions now. This is all breaking in the course of just a couple weeks, well into this House Select Committee investigation where they've been trying to get text messages. And the new reporting from our colleagues Tierney Sneed and Zach Cohen is that text messages were lost from the phones of Department of Defense top officials. Chris Miller, who was the acting secretary at the end
Lost
of the Trump,
or removed?
Deleted.
Deleted.
Right? Chief of Staff Kash Patel, Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy. And what we know, the reason that we know this is because this group, American Oversight, was trying to get access to these federal records in court. And they were told during this litigation that DOD and the Army were wiping the phones of these officials as they were leaving the government at the end of the administration. Now, no one is saying that the individuals themselves were deleting text messages. It does appear to be an institutional thing at this point. But as you said, there is a pattern. What happened at DOD appears to be exactly the same thing as what was happening at DHS, where the secretary and his deputy at the end of the Trump administration also had their phones wiped when they turned them in. And then that's separate from the Secret Service issue where there's all these agents that had a data migration that lost their data.
There are laws about protected federal records.
Indeed.
Were they broken? Caitlin Polans, thanks so much. So let's figure that out. Let's talk to a lawyer, former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. I do want to get to you about Pat Cipollone's subpoena now, but before, just since we were speaking about those text messages here, there are federal laws about record keeping, and now you have three agencies, the Secret Service, the DHS, latest the Pentagon, who deleted these. Any potential laws broken by doing that?
Yes, there are potential laws broken. The consequences, unfortunately, for those are not very stiff. I think the real question is whether or not there was any deletion that was purposeful or done with a mind to an ongoing or future investigation. We do know there's, I believe, a criminal investigation open at DHS by the OIG. That, I think, is something that could have some real legs. I think it's also fair to say Congress is very interested and is conducting some aggressive oversight of that.
Okay, let's talk now about the former, and by the way, this is hugely significant. The DOJ has now subpoenaed the former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, as part of its broader criminal investigation related to Trump's efforts to overturn the election. While he was speaking to the January 6th committee, there were areas that he walled off and would not answer questions on based on claims of executive privilege. Is this different? Will it be different when he's speaking to the grand jury, to federal prosecutors?
Yeah, this is an incredibly different context, and there is binding court precedent on this issue. Bruce Lindsay, who was the deputy White House counsel during the Clinton years in the Clinton White House, who's sitting White House counsel, fought a grand jury subpoena in that context during the Kenneth Starr investigation. He lost before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Basically, government lawyers have a special duty to provide evidence of potential wrongdoing. So I expect that to be a loser if Mr. Cipollone tries to challenge the subpoena on the grounds of it's either attorney-client or executive privilege. But I do expect that there could be a court fight about that issue.
How long does that court fight go?
Could take months, but the Justice Department has time. I suspect Mr. Cipollone will certainly pursue that. But in the end of the day, he appears to me to be somebody who's going to answer the questions if ordered to do so by a court. He's just going to make sure it's clear that he's compelled to give that testimony rather than voluntarily giving his client testimony.
A pattern we've seen before. Renato Mariotti, thanks so much. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has now departed Taiwan, and she did so with a firm message underscoring, quote, ironclad support for Taiwan's democracy.
Today, our delegation, of which I'm very proud, came to Taiwan to make unequivocally clear we will not abandon our commitment to Taiwan, and we are proud of our enduring friendship.
The message from Beijing and to some protesters in Taiwan aligned with the Chinese Communist Party is that this trip was an attempted humiliation, a so-called farce that China says would have a severe impact on relations with the U.S. The Chinese military has now launched live fire military drills around the island as Pelosi arrived, and those drills still active. Joining me now, CNN national security correspondent Kylie Atwood. Kylie, interestingly, and we should note this, that Pelosi got bipartisan support for this trip. A couple dozen Republican senators, along with Mitch McConnell, supported it. You heard that from members of the House as well. Where does State Department stand on this? Do they see substantive change between U.S. and China relations, or do they see this more as a rhetorical pushback from China in light of political pressures at home?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Jim, but I don't think we have a definitive answer to it yet because, as you said, these military exercises are ongoing right now as we understand it. So China announced that they were going to carry out these military exercises over the course of the next few days. And of course, what they look like right now is pretty significant. So I do think we should expect some pretty clear condemnation of these exercises from the Biden administration. That would be rhetorical in nature. But what we are looking for is what these exercises actually do, how close they actually come to Taiwan, to their territorial waters. The Taiwan government has been warning that what they see in terms of what is planned would actually come into their territorial waters. So that's what we're watching for. And does the U.S. government just condemn these exercises because they have been very clear in saying they didn't want China to escalate things? If they did, they said that would be on China. Or do they try and push the envelope here and send some warplanes into the area while these exercises are happening or after they are concluded? We don't know, of course, if they're going to do that, but those are things that we're still watching for right now.
No question. We should note that those are all things that China has done before, to show its interest in Taiwan. Kylie, stay with us. CNN senior international correspondent Will Ripley. He is in Taiwan. And Will, there were a lot of consequential steps in this visit. She met the president. She went to Parliament, spent the night there. How has Taiwan seen this visit now that she has left?
And she also met, with the leadership at TSMC, the world's #1 chip manufacturer, vital to the global economy and tech industry. So, yes, it checked many boxes for President Tsai Ing-wen and her administration to have basically the third most powerful politician in the United States on the ground here in Taiwan, meeting and engaging with the members of this government, giving them that legitimacy that you cannot give someone better legitimacy than to have, a well-established and well-respected politician from the United States like Nancy Pelosi, speaking with you and talking about your democratic system. She was speaking with people, some of whom were, meeting illegally when they were trying to form their political party, the DPP, and now they're the leaders of this country. It is truly, an astonishing story of a democracy that rose from a dictatorship. And Nancy Pelosi is here to send the message to Taiwan that, America has Taiwan's back. Now, do people here in Taiwan, does the government here actually believe that fully? Do they believe that the United States would come in and really fight and put American lives at risk? If China did try to make a move on Taiwan, this whole policy of strategic ambiguity has been really questioned in recent months, even by the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, saying it's time for America to be more clear. Nancy Pelosi, was pretty clear with the message that she gave at Taiwan's parliament, saying that, she is going to not abandon, meaning America is not going to abandon its commitment to Taiwan. Now, the commitment to Taiwan is to supply arms to Taiwan and to train, the Taiwanese how to defend themselves. So that is the commitment. But does the commitment go further than that? Should it go further than that? And will these lawmakers, and Nancy Pelosi, what they saw on the ground here in Taiwan, will that push them towards legislation to do more for Taiwan if and when the time comes that China isn't just conducting exercises, but the real thing, potentially?
Well, it's a good point you make there, Will, that this is a homegrown Taiwanese democracy, and that is part of the thing that makes China uncomfortable, right? China very much undemocratic, and to see that so close to their shores is a challenge to the Chinese Communist Party. Will Ripley in Taiwan, Kylie Atwood in New York, thanks so much. Coming up next, the Democrats' revived effort to get a climate and health care bill passed hinges, this may sound familiar, on one senator. This time it's Kyrsten Sinema. So far, silence, at least in public, from her. I'm going to speak with one of her colleagues, Senator Tim Kaine, on that and many other topics coming up. And we are, after lots of drama and back and forth, the Senate did finally pass a long-sought bill expanding care for millions of veterans who were exposed to toxic burn pits while deployed. President Biden says he is eager to sign it into law. You may remember he's attributed his son's death potentially to such toxic burn pits. Now, Democrats are full steam ahead on bringing the climate and health care bill to the floor as soon as later this week. The holdout for now, at least in public, Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema, she was absent from yesterday's party caucus meeting, but did speak with her colleague Joe Manchin, of course, who's been central to negotiations earlier in the day. Her office still declining to comment in public. I'm joined now by Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. Senator, you got a lot on your plate, so I'm going to try to get through it as we go one by one. First, on reconciliation, how confident are you that Senator Sinema will get on board for this?
Jim, let me give you my intuition, not intel, because Senator Sinema has not told me, and she's doing her due diligence, so she has to do that. My intuition is I'm optimistic that she's going to be a supporter, and that is because while not everything in the bill is something she likes, and there's probably some things she wishes were in the bill, and I feel the same way, there are many pieces of the bill that she not only likes, but she's had a hand in crafting, the prescription drug piece and some of the climate provisions that she's been a strong supporter of. So she's going to do her own due diligence, but of the various things that are worrying me right now, worrying about her support of this bill is not top of the list.
Okay, are you worried about the Senate parliamentarian? Any update on whether the parliamentarian will conclude this fits the reconciliation rules?
I'm confident in that as well. Now, there may be some pieces of it that the parliamentarian may kick out. As you know, each piece has to be analyzed, and the parliamentarian has to rule that it's primarily budgetary, not a policy change. So you could see some adjustments, but I think the core of this bill, as announced, the deal is going to hold intact, and then we just have to go through a very long amendment process, and maybe that's a little bit more of the worry. Are there amendments that are kind of poison pills that cause challenges that if passed might cause problems for the bill? That's my larger worry right now, is just the amendment process.
Understood. Okay, we'll stay on top of it. You're working closely, not just with Senator Sinema, but across the aisle with Senators Collins and Murkowski on the Reproductive Freedom for All Act, in effect codifying protections from Roe v. Wade.
Yes.
You got two Republicans working with you. Can you get 10 GOP votes as necessary for this bill, do you believe?
Jim, right now I don't have more than just the two, but we didn't have 60 votes for gun safety legislation either 90 days ago. And then the tragedies in Buffalo and Texas led us to do something we've been unwilling to do for 10 years. I view kind of post-Dobbs America with stories about 10-year-olds being smuggled across state lines, to get a pregnancy terminated after a rape. There's going to be stories like this every day, states passing cruel and draconian laws. I think that may move votes toward us on a bill like the bipartisan bill that I introduced. So we're not there today, but we do need a federal statutory guarantee, and now we have more than 50 senators on the record supporting the notion of a federal statutory guarantee, which is a good place to start from.
Okay, politics, lots of primaries overnight, and as you know, Democrats were supporting some election deniers in these races, some far-right candidates, some of whom won. They won their primaries and now will be going to the general election to face Democrats. Do you support that effort?
No. I mean, look, if it were me, if I was at the DNC and I was chair like I was 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been supporting election deniers to win races, even though it might have made it easier for us to pick up a race in November. Don't support people who are contrary to, democratic institutions and values. But frankly, what you're seeing, Jim, is there's a lot of these races where Democrats aren't in at all, and yet those people are still winning, the election deniers in Maryland. The Maryland Republican gubernatorial primary to follow Larry Hogan, a moderate Republican. The Maryland Republican Party have picked not only an election denier, but their attorney general candidate is a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. And so this is who the party has become these days, this party of Lincoln. What a tragedy.
Other topic that you're working on, and you believe this vote might be coming, and that is to admit Sweden and Finland to NATO. Will their membership, in your view, deter Russia from further military aggression in Europe or make conflict more likely?
Jim, I think it's ultimately a deterrent. And as you know, if you polled Sweden and Finland, the populations on becoming members of NATO a year ago, you would have been lucky to get 25%. But Sweden and Finland, who are very capable militaries and who tend to do things together, they've seen the reality of who Vladimir Putin is, and they want to join with other like-minded democracies to protect themselves. Putin has made some tough statements about them joining NATO, but it's going to end up being a huge value to NATO. NATO, demonstrating the importance of NATO, adding capacity to NATO, and I think it's ultimately going to be a strong deterrent.
Okay, two more topics before we go. Taiwan Policy Act, another thing on your plate here. Bipartisan legislation would provide more security assistance to Taiwan, but it also would classify Taiwan as, quote, a major non-NATO ally. Does that commit the U.S. to military action if China were to invade?
Jim, you're going to see a really robust discussion about this in the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm a member later today. I think many of the policies in that bill are smart. They reflect the reality of what we're doing right now. I think there is some language, there's some efforts to amend or change some of the language that could be seen as potentially too forward-leaning. And I hope we do some more work to maybe align the positions of the Senate and the administration on this bill. So, I'm saying stay tuned, because I think you're going to see more work on this.
Okay, final topic here. There's open talk now about President Biden as the candidate or not as the candidate in 2024. Democratic Representative Carolyn Maloney of New York says she does not believe President Joe Biden will run again. Do you believe the president will run in 2024?
I have no idea. I've been asked if he does, will I support him? And the answer is yes. I don't know what his intentions are. I tell you, Joe Biden with the gun bill, with the CHIPS bill, with the veterans bill, which is not only on the burn pit issue, but it also involves construction of new VA facilities, including in Virginia. With this climate and inflation fighting bill, he's been on a roll in the last couple of months in a really positive way. So I have no idea what he's going to do. If he runs, I'm going to back him.
Senator Tim Kaine, we know you got a lot of work to do. We'll let you get back to it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jim.
Today marks 50 straight days of falling gas prices. The national average per gallon today at $4.16, down 3 cents from yesterday. You see the downward graph there. Gas prices have tumbled by 86 cents since hitting a high of $5.02 on June 14th. Joining me now to discuss the broader picture, White House Senior Advisor on Energy Security, Amos Hochstein. Amos, good to have you on this morning.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be here.
$1 less a gallon, that's a lot. People will notice that. But how long do White House forecasts show this decline will last?
Well, first, again, thanks for having me. And as you said, it's been 50 days. And let's review this. 50 days ago, when prices were over $5, the predictions in the market were that prices were actually going on the way up, and they were going to go to fears of $7 and $8. You remember the lots of coverage of that. Instead, the prices have come down now for most of Americans already below $4. So it's actually over $1 from where they were just about 6 weeks ago. Oil prices were at just about $120, and today they're at about $95, so a $25 decline almost in oil prices. That's quite remarkable, and it follows some of the steps that we've taken in order to try to stabilize oil markets, stabilize gasoline markets, bring those prices down. I got to tell you, their president doesn't feel like they're down enough, so we're going to continue to plug along.
Let me ask you this, because as a European ban on Russian oil goes into effect, the overall oil market will tighten further, and there are concerns, as you know, about Russian retaliation, perhaps even going so far as to shutting down its supply. Should consumers brace themselves for the possibility prices go back up in the fall?
Well, I think you raise a really excellent point. I think part of what we're doing to reduce these prices is on the backdrop of a war in Europe where the invader, Russia, is one of the largest oil producers in the world, an important supplier of refined products, of gasoline and diesel, and they're under sanctions. So what we have proposed, and we're working with our G7 allies and for countries around the world, is to say, look, we can keep the Russian products and keep the Russian supply on the market, but let's limit how much revenue they get from that. That would allow for the markets to continue to operate in a stable manner, but ensure that Putin has less dollars to execute his war.
Well, of course, the problem is Putin's not going to like that, right? And is the White House concerned about and prepared for him retaliating in some way? I mean, listen, this is a guy who knows that rising gas prices have political implications in this country, and he's someone, as you know, who has not hesitated to interfere in U.S. elections in the past.
Well, I think that you're right. He is well aware of that. I also know that he is very reliant on oil revenues for anything. The economy in Russia is collapsing beyond what all the spin around it is the sanctions and the isolation that Russia is experiencing from the rest of the world has hit them very hard. Economic activity is reduced to basically just oil revenues. So if you take those away completely, there will be nothing left. And therefore, I think we can arrive at something where there is an oil price cap that he can still sell his oil, but limit the revenues that he has. This is very complicated when Ukraine's fighting a war against an oil producer. We have to figure out how to do that while maintaining the American cost down for consumers.
Final question. OPEC has agreed to raise output slightly, 100,000 barrels a day. As you know, that's a fraction of the daily output. Does that significantly impact folks' wallets here at home?
Well, no, it doesn't. But it's a step in the right direction. Look, when just before the president announces travel to Saudi Arabia, to meet with Gulf leaders and Middle East leaders, there was an announcement of an increase, a more significant increase of oil production by OPEC for July and August. We saw reports yesterday that for the month of July, Saudi Arabia increased their production quite significantly. And now this was supposed to be a zero increases, and we're seeing some increases, not a lot. But our main focus is not about the numbers of barrels. Our main focus is on bringing prices down. That's what the president keeps telling us. Bring those prices down, do what you got to do. And there, I think that we're in decent shape, and we're going to continue to work to bring it down lower.
The president just went to Saudi Arabia, a significant visit for the Saudis. Is he disappointed that the OPEC increase wasn't bigger?
I think what we're focused on is keeping those prices down. We wanted to see some increases in the production before we announced the trip. We saw that, a significant increase in July and August. This is a smaller increase, but an increase nonetheless. But I think we're focused much more on the bottom line, and that is reducing the price of oil in the market, again, by $25 since the day that the president announced his trip. And today, we see gasoline prices for American consumers, for most of them, well below $4. So we're in the right, that's what we're really focused on. And I think that trajectory is what we want to see continue.
Amos Hochstein, thanks so much for joining the broadcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.